Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by WynnBET. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese of the Action Network, and I'm joined by my colleague, Mike Iannello. As always, we're back in the saddle. This is our Week 5, Group of 5 deep dive, and a little bit of housekeeping, some fun stuff to report. Our Underdog parlay in Week 4 cashed thanks to the hard work of UAB and UTSA. And this is pretty simple. My G5 hero of the week is tied to that monumental comeback by the Roadrunners in Memphis. And it's Sincere McCormick carrying the ball 42 times. It struck me as like a 1970s kind of veer offense, or, student body left, student body right. Almost every play was drawn up for him. I think John McKay was the former coach, used to say, the ball's not that heavy, so it's not that difficult to carry it 40 times. I would disagree, but he cashed in for 3 touchdowns, over 180 yards on the ground. And what I like is that we talk about competency and teams having a true identity. UTSA down the stretch knew exactly what they were doing. And I'll go ahead and pat myself on the back a little bit. Memphis, starting an 18-year-old quarterback, had an opportunity to lead a drive under 5 minutes, put them in a position to win the game, couldn't get it done. The stage seemed a little bit too big for him. So I went with the veteran team, and they pull it out of the fire for us and help cash a parlay north of 5-1. Who's your G5 hero of the week, Mike? And what were your thoughts on the dramatics that were required to hit that parlay?
Yeah, I actually had to scramble here because I had Sincere McCormick written down as well. Like you said, just absolutely dominated. 42 carries, most rushes by any player in the country this season in a game. He had 200, and he had 33 receiving yards, so he had 217 of UTSA's 399 total yards. Just do it all. But since you took him, because that's what I had written down, I'll give out another one. I'm gonna give a group one here. I'm just gonna give it to Bowling Green. Because Bowling Green, not only did they win, but they got paid $1.45 million to go to Minnesota as a 31-point underdog and beat them on their home turf. And, this wasn't a very good App State team. App State has proven to be one of the better G5 teams in the country. This wasn't App State beating Michigan. Bowling Green hasn't beaten any FCS team since November 2019, and that was Akron. So, Bowling Green is borderline the worst team in the country, and they just beat Minnesota at home, and they got paid $1.5 million to do it. So, I'll give my G5 hero of the week to Bowling Green.
It seems to come up a lot, the idea of getting paid to beat somebody. Just on a personal note, is there any activity you ever take advantage of where you get paid, but actually you're benefiting on top of it? Like, do you ever get to house sit where like the dog's amazing and the house is beautiful and you get paid? Like, trying to think of the right analogy. Maybe you're that last second fill in to be a wedding date or something, and then you end up being the star of the wedding. Like, have you ever had an experience where you're getting that double value at the same time?
Well, I mean, we get paid by Action Network to win gambling bets. So I guess we're kind of doubling down on that, aren't we? We're getting paid to watch college football.
I think that's the analogy I was fishing for there. So I'm glad that you pulled that out. And as always, you've set me up perfectly for my best bet of the week. You mentioned Bowling Green, who statistically is still not very good. And I am more than happy to fade the positivity going for the Falcons right now and go ahead with a team that, talk about like us just being all over a team this year. We picked against Kent State 3 separate times, twice on my side of the show, and you went ahead last week and faded them against Maryland. They're 0-3 in those spots, so 3 straight winners from us. I'm finally ready to embrace Sean Lewis, who thinks that every game is the Super Bowl, coaches like he's a total maniac. The offense last week, I finally saw what I needed to see. They had their entire receiving core together. Jashawn Polk ends up joining Nakeem Johnson and Cephas. Cephas had a huge game against Maryland, went for over 150 yards receiving. And I think this is finally an opportunity where Dustin Crum puts it all together. He had over 300 yards passing, a clean sheet, no interceptions, no turnovers, had a 25-yard run on a scramble as well. I think they finally put it together and survived this gauntlet. With the exception of VMI, they had to play Iowa, Texas A&M, Maryland. That's probably by the end of the season 3 top 25 teams. Laying only 16.5 in the spot against the Falcons, I think, is a gift. Bowling Green's only scoring 16.5 points per game. So even though they shock Minnesota, they do it with just 2 touchdowns. And I don't think that's going to cut it in MAC play. I think they're going to be exposed, and I think they're going to get boat raced in a few spots. On top of it, they're 124th in total offense. So it's not like they've been snake bit on third downs or not cashing in the red zone. They just can't move the football altogether. And then finally, something that I talked about in the A&M game, in the Iowa game with Kent State. Kent State's Achilles heel is they can't stop the run. And that's not going to change because they can't switch up personnel midseason. And really, you can only do so much from a schematic perspective. Don't worry, Bowling Green dead last in the FBS in rushing. So everything to me is pointing Kent State. I think this is a neck crack game for them. They're going to feel good about themselves and win by 3+ touchdowns. So 16.5, I think, is a number to take advantage of.
Yeah, like you said, I think Bowling Green's offense is still not very good. The only thing that, I will say, give Bowling Green credit. I don't know that any team has ever had a better addition by subtraction than Bowling Green when Brian Van Gorder retired. I bet you the Bowling Green fans threw him a retirement party very similar to Michael Scott throwing a goodbye party for Toby, where they were just goodbye Brian, because I mean, look how much better defense looks immediately just by him leaving.
I think that's a perfect analogy, and I hope that we can keep the office analogies going here and not pull a Kevin Malone and spill our best bet chili all over the floor, because last week we didn't hit either after getting off to just a really hot start. I think we were 9-1 to start the year. So let's pair it up with another winner here. Who do you like as your best bet in week 5?
Yeah, so like you said, we need to get back on track with the best bets. So I'm going back to Old Faithful. At this point, we are the Big Bets on Campus podcast, Group of 5 deep dive, sponsored by WynnBET and the Fresno State Bulldogs. I'm going back to our beloved Bulldogs. Look, we all know how much everyone who listens knows how much we love Jake Haener. He's balling out all over the place. 15 touchdowns, 2 picks. Jalen Cropper is awesome. Leads the country with 8 touchdowns. Josh Kelly's been great. Ronnie Rivers has been great. The Hawaii pass defense ranks 112th in the country, and they're 116th on finishing drives. This offense is going to torch them. But for me, what I really liked about this, and what kind of flies under the radar considering how well Haener's played, the Fresno State defense has been awesome. They ranked 26th in passing success rate on defense. They held both Oregon and UCLA under 400 total yards. We've talked about this before. I do not believe in Cordero at all for Hawaii. He's got 7 TDs, 6 picks. I just don't think he's that good. And the biggest thing, too, is Fresno State's defense ranks 14th in havoc rate this season. The Hawaii offense is 102nd at preventing havoc. That defense is going to live in the backfield. They're going to force Cordero to make mistakes. The Fresno State secondary has been awesome all season. And yeah, I think this line's a little low just because people, they're going to Hawaii. There's going to be no fans there. They really don't have a home field advantage. I don't know that, I don't know what they're factoring in the Hawaii home field advantage, but I think it's too much here. So I will gladly lay 10 points to the Fresno State team, who I think is just much, much better than Hawaii.
I agree. And just to piggyback on that a little bit, they had their letdown game after the UCLA win, against UNLV. That was a stay away spot for me because I think it had letdown written all over it. And then Hawaii on the other side, they cover against New Mexico State, which was a tough melt in the fourth quarter. New Mexico State covering the whole way, and then they get themselves in like a 4th and 35 and decide to go for it like it's NFL blitz, and you can just pick up 35 yards. They don't pick it up. Hawaii scores. They end up covering. It was a sad Cowboy situation for me, just kind of being on my lonesome on the range, having put my faith in one of the worst teams in the FBS. So Hawaii getting a little bit of a bump, I think, is undeserved in that spot. So I'm with you. So now we're going to transition to our underdog moneyline parlay here in week 5. This is one that we've hit twice already this season, and it can be really lucrative if you pair up the right teams. As per usual, one is a little bit conservative and one's out there. So why don't we start with the conservative pick before, people get a little too gun shy of what we're throwing out here?
Yeah, I'm gonna play. I would say a little bit safe, but you know me. I have to go to an action game. I'm taking Eastern Michigan plus 120 at Northern Illinois. We kind of faded Eastern Michigan earlier this year. Preston Hutchinson just has struggled kind of early on in the season. They made the quarterback switch. They went to Ben Bryant, who is a transfer from Cincinnati. He started week 3 and 4. He's looked much better. He's completed 65% of his passes, 4 touchdowns, no picks. He's very mobile, which is good. Something Hutchinson doesn't really bring. This Eastern Michigan team is just very experienced. They returned 21 starters. They have 2 good running backs in Jawan Hamilton and Darius Boone. Offense was great last year at finishing drives. And, their run defense was horrible last year. That was kind of their big issue, but they have looked a little bit better this year. 3-1, beat teams really they needed to beat St. Francis, beat UMass. They smoked Texas State last week, which I was good to see. And obviously, yeah, their one loss was to Wisconsin, but you kind of have to expect that. And, we've talked about it before. I'm just not a believer in Rocky Lombardi. He's got 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions this year. This Northern Illinois team is still very young. Most of them were true freshmen last year, so now they're just sophomores this year. And Eastern Michigan returns basically all of their starters. So to me, I think Eastern Michigan is the better team. So this is kind of a wrong team favorite situation, in my opinion. So I'll take Eastern Michigan at plus 120 against Northern Illinois.
We've touched upon it a few times here in the podcast in the opening 6 weeks, dating back to week 0 and some of the preseason content. It's interesting that there's been multiple teams that have pulled off the multi-QB look, and it's actually been a positive. I know that Hutchinson's been phased out more and more, and Ben Bryant has kind of embraced that QB1 designation. But even when they're both playing, they're still moving the football and they're scoring points. So I like that play there. I teed it up as my pick being a little bit more ambitious, and I think it's certainly more ambitious. Plus 355, we're talking about the South Alabama Jaguars to knock off Louisiana. And it's pretty simple when you look at the Sun Belt from the preseason and really, a month into the year as we turn to conference play. The Sun Belt was a story of 2 divisions. The East was loaded. You had App State, you had Coastal Carolina, and the West was viewed as a 1-team race. Louisiana was just going to take it, cruise into the title game, and they had some of the worst teams in the Sun Belt situated there in the West. But I think there's value here. I mean, I've already plucked Texas State at times this year. They cover against Baylor in a game that they were in it for 4 quarters. And South Alabama is off to a 3-0 start. Kane Womack, their head coach, has done a really nice job coming down from Indiana. And really, it's come down to transforming their defense, which was at best an average Sun Belt defense. At worst, they were just getting punked last year. It's not happening this year. I'm just going to run down some stats real quick. They are first nationally in third down defense. They are 4th against the run, top 20 in interception and sack rate, and they're forcing 3 turnovers per game. Now, I understand that they played Bowling Green, who we've detailed, that they're not exactly world beaters. They played Southern Miss. They played an FCS school, but they did what they were supposed to do. They won all 3 of those games. And I think what's nice about what South Alabama is doing is that they finally have a running game to complement Jalen Tolbert, a guy dating back to last year, his last 5 games. He's averaging 132 yards receiving per game. He's a big kid. He's got an NFL future. He's 6'3". He can make explosive plays. He can catch those contested passes, breaking games wide open. And Jake Bentley has provided exactly what I was hoping that Jake Bentley would in the spot for South Alabama, which is he's been competent. He hasn't tried to win the games on his own shoulders. He's over 60% completions. He only has 1 interception. So when you pair that with a defense that has been really stout, has done a nice job in terms of, creating havoc vis-a-vis where they were last year, all of that starts to creep in against a Louisiana team that, in my opinion, what's happened is that Levi Lewis has gotten a little bit better. He's put more of the game plan on his shoulders, but this was really a running team that liked to win close games. Losing Trey Regis, losing Elijah Mitchell to the NFL, now working with the 49ers in their backfield, it's just not the same. And their yards per carry has taken a real dip there at 4.1 yards per carry, only 151 yards per game. And because of that, I think you're going to see a familiar script play out, which is the Raging Cajuns letting a team that's not that good hang around. Dating back to last season, they've played in 9 one-score games. And it wasn't just, when they took a step up against an Iowa State. They actually won that game, running away. It wasn't against Texas in a game that they got blown out this year. When you look back across their last 2 seasons, in a lot of cases, you got games against Nicholls State. They almost lost in week 2. Georgia Southern twice, the last 2 years has been a 1-possession game. Georgia State, this team has been playing with fire, and I think it's time they finally get burned. I'm going to go with the Jags here. As I always like to ask, when I throw out these picks, is it too crazy or just your right level of kookiness?
I think it's just crazy enough. I think it helps that we hit this last week, so we have a little money in our pocket to play with. I feel a lot more comfortable going big game hunting after a win. But I'm with you. I've kind of been on the fade Louisiana train a little bit. They got a ton of hype this offseason. I was very happy to bet Texas against them week 1. I bet Coastal to win the Sun Belt. So I've kind of been and fade them a little bit already. And like you said, I think the loss of the two running backs has been very noticeable, especially the first couple of weeks. They didn't know who to give the ball to. They were rotating backs. No one stepped up. And Levi Lewis was great last year in kind of that, do enough to win the game role. He was awesome at it. And now that he's the dude, he's proven kind of not to be. And I totally agree with you. I think having a veteran quarterback in Jake Bentley, who's like 35, he's been in college, for 10 years. I was looking up. He was, when he first started at South Carolina, he was throwing passes to guys like Hayden Hurst and Deebo Samuel. It's like they've been in the NFL for like 3 years. So yeah, Jake Bentley having that veteran presence, I think makes me feel a lot more comfortable in this pick. And like you said, Kane Womack coming over from Indiana has really changed this defense around. So I like it. I don't think it's that crazy at all, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would throw in, he's probably got recruited by who? Lou Holtz or Steve Spurrier, somewhere way back in time for South Carolina, was probably getting his in-home visit.
Also, to be honest, last time he got crazy, it worked.
And speaking of crazy, you're going to want to go ahead and consult the updated Wynn Sportsbook odds. But as of right now, it's plus 825 on that parlay. So 2 games, as our voiceover angel likes to say, turning good weekends into great weekends. Hopefully we can cash in there. Speaking of cashing in, the G5 round robin, we like to call it the high five here. So the G5 high five round robin for week 5, easy for me to say. We got 5 picks here. I'm actually feeling really good about it. We talked in the preseason, we talked in week 1 and week 2, basically saying, hey, stick with us. It's going to be difficult to get consistency and a good feel on a week-to-week basis on some of these G5 teams because they're always playing up in competition and non-conference play. We're finally here, almost in earnest across the board for conference play. And because of that, it made it, at least from my perspective, a lot easier to find the value. And also looking at teams that the public has been down on, they may limp into conference play 1-3 or 2-2, having taken some serious high scoring losses to Power 5 teams. Because of that, I think it sets up for some real value to be mined out of here. Let's go ahead and tee up your first one as a part of our 5-pack.
Yeah, for my first one, I'm going to go with I think this is going to be a really fun game. I'm going with Tulane at East Carolina over 64.5. To me, this has all the makings of a shootout. East Carolina ranks 97th in passing success rate on defense. Tulane ranks 98th. Both of these teams are allowing over 450 yards per game, 5.9 yards per play. And both teams have good quarterbacks that I like. Pratt's got 10 touchdowns and 2 picks on the year. He put up 300 yards last week against a really good UAB defense. ECU has been inconsistent at times, but they put up 561 yards against Memphis, who's also a Marshall, who has a very good defense. Holden Ahlers threw for 368 yards in that game against Marshall. So, when Ahlers is on, we've seen it. We saw it last year. He can light them up. Both of these teams run very fast. They both rank in the top 40 in plays per minute, and they both rank on the outside of the top 90 in tackling. So combine those together, great quarterbacks, really bad pass defenses. I think this can be a shootout. Give me over 64.5 Tulane at East Carolina.
Back in my days when I would book a few bets before we were in this wonderful era where you could bet just in the palm of your hand in your smartphone. When I was having to take those bets and handle that exposure, there'd be certain plays that would come in on a weekly basis, and as soon as I saw it, I'd be like, I'm in trouble there. If I had under in this game from the very moment it starts, I'm sweating it. I need red zone turnovers. I need some weird inefficiencies to be able to go under that number. Because I agree, both of these offenses can pop. Either one of them, if you told me they scored 40 points in this game, I wouldn't blink an eye. So I agree. I think that all the upside on this is on the over. For the first one, I'll keep this simple. SMU minus 20.5, playing against a South Florida team that had to fly almost all the way across the country to play BYU last week. They get a huge break in Jaron Hall, being a late scratch. And because of that, I think you saw BYU kind of just, fold up shop in the second half. They didn't push the envelope in the second half. They end up not covering. I don't think it's because South Florida all of a sudden is this stout defense, and they're going to have to face an SMU passing attack that has been electric, to say the least. Tanner Mordecai, a plug-and-play guy, comes in from Oklahoma, has an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver. Danny Gray has just been killing teams. He's thrown at least 4 touchdown passes in his 4 starts for SMU. He's up to 20 on the season. They are now hitting 9.1 yards per attempt when Mordecai lets it fly. And on top of that, passing plays of 20 yards per or more they're top 10 nationally. So it's not dink and dunk. It's not a spread you out to beat you by death by 1,000 cuts. This is a team that's going to make chunk plays. And because of that, I think they are in a spot to score a lot against the South Florida defense, which honestly, I still don't think that they can generate enough pressure to force Mordecai into some mistakes. And that's what you've seen from him this year. He's been electric. He's, pushed the ball down the field, lots of touchdowns, but he has had a decent amount of interceptions. You saw it last week against TCU, kept the Horned Frogs in that game. I think he'll get that cleaned up in this spot. And then finally, the South Florida offense, having watched them a few times this year, when you look at what happened in the opener against NC State, they end up getting shut out. Timmy McClain comes in and he's done a nice job of extending plays, but when he's under pressure, he's turned the ball over. And this SMU team, when you look at the Pro Football Focus rankings for overall pass rush, they're top 20. So even though they haven't got to the quarterback in terms of their raw sack numbers this year, they have a lot of hurries, and I think they're going to force McClain into some mistakes in this one. So I actually had this at 27.5 in my power rankings. To see it a full touchdown off at 20.5, I'll go ahead and take the Mustangs here. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yep, I like it. I had it written down. We talked about early in the year, kind of those G5 quarterbacks who were going to fly up the draft rankings this year. We talked about, the Carson Strongs, the Dustin Crums, the Jake Hainers. There are more guys playing himself in that discussion. He's been awesome. He's just throwing the ball all over the yard. And obviously, having that Oklahoma pedigree behind him too kind of makes him look a little better as well. So yeah, Mordecai's been awesome. And I agree. I had this written down. I didn't end up giving it out, but it was definitely on my card of consideration.
All right, what's your next one here for the round robin?
For my next one, I'm backing a team we faded last week. I'm going with Memphis -11 at Temple. This Memphis offense has never been the problem. They lead the AAC and with 7.25 yards per play. Freshman Seth Hennigan, who wasn't even expected to be the guy, has looked really good. He's averaging 292 yards per game, 9 touchdowns, just 1 pick. They have 3 really good running backs they use: Brandon Thomas, Rodriguez Clark, Asa Martin. And then obviously we've talked a lot about, the human electric factory that is Calvin Austin III. Second in the country now with 533 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's awesome. They've pretty much, taken care of business. They beat a good Arkansas State team. They beat Nichols, obviously. They beat Mississippi State. And then, they lost last week to UTSA, who ran it down their throat. And we knew they were going to do that. That's why we called it. Temple's not going to do that. Temple is last in the American in rushing. They're 98th in the country in rushing success rate. They're also 100th in passing success rate. Their expected starter running back coming into this year, last year's leader, Iverson Clement, he left the team, so he's gone. Their quarterback from last year, Anthony Russo, he's off to Michigan State. So, DeJuan Mathis is their quarterback. He has not looked good. And, you look into Temple's numbers, and the first thing that kind of jumps out at you that's a bit surprising is their pass defense has been excellent this year. But they've played Rutgers, Akron, Boston College is backup quarterback, and Wagner. So I'm not buying those numbers. I don't think, Rutgers doesn't even try to pass. Akron is probably the worst passing team in the country. And they played, they held BC's backup in check, and then obviously Wagner. So I think this Memphis team is just significantly better than Temple. I think Temple's, probably the worst team in the American, if not close to it. So I'll lay the 11 with Memphis. I think they bounce back after that tough loss to UTSA.
Yeah, seeing a heartbreaking loss like that to UTSA, really, to me, I think it just validates how good Memphis can be when they get it all together. To be able to race out to a lead like that and to have that offensive balance, I agree. I think Temple is going to be totally outgunned in this spot with a non-existent home field. So there's really no reason to get excited about an owl play there. So I like that one. I'm going to turn to one that we may disagree on, and this is a name that you've probably heard a few times here on the pod. Bailey Zappi leading the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. They're perfect against the spread this year. And, in that very first week, we had a few picks. I think it was team total and the spread against UT Martin. He ends up going ballistic in that game. Since then, I've been on the sideline because, they play Army. I think to myself, that's a tough spot where you could be off the field for 8 or 9 minutes. They score 35 points. They cover at, in a spot in West Point, playing on 9/11, one of the most electric crowds of all time at West Point. Just the fact that they walked into that Hornets nest and were really an onside kick recovery away from winning that game, I think is really impressive for WKU. And then they go and play Indiana, a team that defensively really should have been able to match up much better against them. They score a lot of points there. They cover another number. And here they come again against Michigan State, who's coming off an overtime, victory over Nebraska, a game that required a miracle, that fluky trick play almost on that punt return ends up getting them tied, sends them to overtime. They win the game. Getting 11 points here, I think, is too much, because what do we know about Western Kentucky? They're a top 15 offense in total offense. They're top 2, top 3 in almost every passing metric. So they can really do that through the air. And Michigan State, 81st in total defense, but 107th in pass defense. I know they played some good teams in Miami. Nebraska was able to move the ball on the ground and through the air. But I think this is a red flag game for Michigan State. And another small point, I know there's different coaching staffs, and sometimes these historical numbers are of no value to gamblers, but I think this is an interesting fact. Since 2015, Michigan State is dead last in the Big Ten against the spread in non-conference games, 7-15. And talk about a letdown spot, and that weird kind of like sandwich where you're in conference play, but then you're back out into non-conference play. This will mean a lot to the Western Kentucky kids. I'm not sure you're going to see the same kind of energy out of the Spartans. I know exactly what I'm getting out of Zappy and the aerial attack. So I'm going to go ahead with them. I like the 11. I had this at 7.5. So to cross over that key number of 10, I think that's where the value is. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Maybe we can get a mini bet or another conference flag bet on the table. But talk me out of, I guess, hypothetically, this Western Kentucky play.
Look, I love Bailey Zappi, and I hate having to go against him here. And obviously, hey, we're a team here, so I'm rooting for Western Kentucky now because I want the G5 High 5 Week 5 to do very well. But this makes me super nervous. I know you talked about Michigan State's passing success rate, and that is concerning, but they also have a 27th best coverage grade according to Pro Football Focus. So their corners have been covering guys well. For me, this comes down to the trenches. This is just, I think it's going to be Big Ten football, bully ball. Indiana doesn't really play that style, but Michigan State certainly does. Michigan State is first in the country in rushing success on offense. Kenneth Walker has been a beast. He leads the country in rushing. He's a man possessed. Western Kentucky is 127th in rush defense. Michigan State is going to absolutely run it down their throat all game long, and the Hilltoppers are not going to be able to stop them. I just think this is going to get, Michigan State is going to push them around both sides of the ball. Peyton Thorne has been surprisingly good for Michigan State, 10 touchdowns, just 1 pick. So he's clearly taken a big step forward, which is big for them. And then, again, I just think Michigan State, Big Ten football, they're going to bully them. They're going to push them around in the trenches. And they're going to run down their throat. I don't know. I'm nervous about this one. I'm rooting for you. I hope you cover for the podcast's sake. But I think this could get ugly. I think Michigan State just bullies them.
I probably should look through the Cameo library to see what Michigan State quarterback I can pay to wish you well and backing the Spartans here. Maybe a Tony Banks, a Jeff Smoker. I'm sure Jeff Smoker could probably use the 30
probably can't
bucks.
Be Rocky Lombardi. Probably can't be Rocky Lombardi the amount of times I've ripped him on this podcast.
Kirk Cousins. There's got to be somebody in there, the pantheon of forgettable Michigan State pocket passers.
Give me Connor Cook. I like Connor Cook. There
we go. I'll dial up Connor Cook for you. I'll put a max of $70 on it for a 30-second cameo. I believe we need one more. Is it on me this week for the round robin? Because I have one more in the chamber. I'm going to go with UTEP. And listen, the Miners, I believe if they win this week, they will have surpassed their win total for the entire season. So not a lot of people were buying on, West Texas, the pride of West Texas. And in this spot, I think they're a much better team. And the reason why I think they're a much better team is because due to some injuries and some shuffling in their backfield, they had to grow up quickly through the passing game. And they have. Hardison and Jacob Cowing have connected in a major way. He's over 10 yards per attempt. Cowing is 23.4 yards per reception, which is top 5 nationally. And now that Hankins is back, he hasn't even really been needed. When you look at their performances against New Mexico State and New Mexico, in both of those wins, he was either injured or limited. So I think this is a UTEP team that honestly is still being undervalued. It's pretty rare to see the minus next to UTEP. I think last week they were -1. It's all the way up to 5.5. But this is an ODU team that got their heart broken last week against your darlings, the Buffalo Bulls, missing that extra point, could have pushed it into overtime. That's a gut punch. And for a team to then have to travel halfway across the country for a game that's, I think there's an interesting home field advantage in the Sun Bowl. And finally, UTEP has a little bit of juice. So I think you'll see the crowd give them a little bit of a bump here. And I mentioned a few times my power rankings when I was consulting it. This is purely on that. I had them -9.5, -10 right on that line. So to go under the key number of a touchdown, 5.5, give me the Miners. I'm ready to keep rolling with them.
Yeah, it's one of those ones I really don't have a feel for, but I trust you. I know we backed UTEP before. Did we take them last week, I think?
Yes, we did. They were able to handle
Perfect.
New Mexico, I think 20-13. So kind of a pillow fight there. But the defense, once again, bowed their neck, has been surprisingly good against the run. I think you'll continue to see that this weekend.
Yeah, I love going back to the well then. Miner Nation.
Any final thoughts on the G5 slate? Maybe something that was left on the cutting room floor that was just close to being a bet that you wanted to pull the trigger on?
Not really. You know, I kind of like Marshall laying 10 against Middle Tennessee. The one thing I don't know that I'm going to bet this, but I just wanted to mention it. And we obviously, as the group of five, you know, stands at the Action Network, and we have to kind of wave our group of five flag. It's pretty wild that a G5 team is laying points at Notre Dame. You know, an undefeated top 10 rank, you know, not some, you know, fluky Notre Dame. They're undefeated top 10 in the country, and they're a home dog against a G5 team. I think that's pretty cool. And you know, I don't know that I'm going to play Cincinnati. I think if I was going to bet that game, that is obviously kind of the headliner this week from the G5. I like that first half under 24.5. We don't even know Notre Dame's quarterback's going to be. So I think, you know, whether it's Drew Pine, the Pride of Connecticut, or whoever, I think we see some feeling out between two really good defenses. So I may end up playing that first half under 24.5. But at the end of the day, I think it's awesome that G5 team's laying points at Notre Dame.
I think that's a great play, to be honest. I think that deserves the designation of an added bonus play on our slate.
All right, we're throwing it on the card. I'm locking it in now. Lock it up.
We're throwing it on.
Cincinnati Notre Dame, first half under 24.5.
Because your logic it stands up, and on top of it, you have Freeman, now the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. So I see that certainly, you know, coming out of the blocks. If anyone knows how to corral, you know, Desmond Ridder and this Bearcat attack, you would think it would be him. And Notre Dame, you know, you did say that their top 10, it's not fluky. Their performance against Wisconsin couldn't have been flukier with all the fourth quarter scores. So I think that really dresses up the fact that they're still dysfunctional on offense. The offensive line has taken such a step backwards that Kyron Williams, who I thought was, you know, headed towards a borderline first round NFL draft pick evaluation, can't get out of the starting blocks. So if Cincinnati is able to bottle up the running game, it's going to be on the shoulders of a backup quarterback. I think under in the first 30 minutes is absolutely the play. So I love that one. And I'll just tack on one final thought. You mentioned Fresno earlier. I love their team total over 37.5 as well. So that's going to be another single play for me. I just think that's, you know, the pure matchup of Haener and Cropper and really Ronnie Rivers in the passing game as well out of the backfield. They're going to eat up that Hawaii pass defense. So I like them in that spot to go over 37.5. And that is it for the Group of Five deep dive here on the Big Bets on Campus podcast, week number 5. A reminder to our listeners that Stuckey and Colin Wilson will be back Thursday night into Friday morning is when the episode will drop. It's the full slate, the full buffet, G5, Power 5, Independence. They're covering every single game. They go so far in depth. You can't miss it before you put together your Saturday card. So be sure to check, to subscribe, to like, to comment, do all those things. It certainly helps us here at the Action Network, and we appreciate you listening. This has been the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by WynnBET.